Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of Choosing the Red Pill with Rajesh and Omer. And today we will discuss labor laws, deregulation, or reform. We have Ajay Mallareddy with us on this discussion, who will bring out the libertarian perspective into the discussion. He's a business person and entrepreneur from Hyderabad, and he owns an amazing place called Flying Spaghetti Monster, which is a greatest place to chill in Hyderabad. From personal speaking. So today we will be discussing how the Indian government has introduced changes, some radical changes, someone would say, in the labor laws, and the relationship between industrialists and the laborers is going to change. Some people are saying that it is a huge step forward, the likes of reform, liberalization of 91, while some are saying it is an anti-poor legislation. So I welcome Ajay, first of all, and let's see, we will hopefully arrive at some conclusions in this debate.
Hello Rajesh. Hello Omar. Glad to be here.
Hi, hi Ajay, hi Omer, and everybody. Welcome to Choosing the Red Pill, episode 4. We're going to be talking about labor reforms today. So, please go ahead and continue. Ajay, you were saying something.
So when we look at the Indian economy, before this coronavirus pandemic hit us, it was already not in a very great shape, as we know. So the automobile industry was dwindling, and the GDP growth rate was also not looking very promising. In such a time when there was unemployment increasing, we see that the government, especially state government of UP and Madhya Pradesh, and the central government also, either completely changed the labor laws or even abolished some of them. So I would take this question to Ajay first. Do you think India needs some deregulation or abolishment or a reform in the existing labor laws?
Okay, so here's what I think. I don't think that labor reform or deregulation are two different things. For me, I look at it in the sense that reform itself has to be deregulation. Like, let's talk about what Uttar Pradesh has actually done. They've suspended a few labor laws, and not all of them. They've suspended the Trade Unions Act, the Industrial Disputes Factories Act, Contract Labor Act, and they've kept a few of them, the Maternity Act. So the thing is, we haven't really deregulated. I know a lot of people might find this like a radical reform, and considering that this is India, nothing wrong in thinking of it in that sense. But if I had to say, I would say that they haven't done enough, because one, they have not really deregulated them. They've just sort of given a temporary respite. They've a 3-year, I think, what Uttar Pradesh has done, and I think maybe Madhya Pradesh has done it for like 1,000 days or something, and they haven't gone far enough. So let me put that out, and that's the libertarian perspective. So to reform labor laws, for the most part, you have to actually absolutely get rid of them. There are maybe 200 acts, labor acts in India, all weird, different sort of acts, and I think around 25% of them are central government acts. So we have not been able to compete in the global economy, even in areas where we have a natural advantage. Like, the greatest advantage that India has is population, right? So and population, probably not a very high skilled labor, but in industries which are labor intensive, definitely we have an advantage because we have a lot of labor available, and we have been behind on that sector. Um, it's just that I think that even if we get rid of all the labor laws that we currently have, it's not really going to immediately mean that a lot of atrocities are going to be committed against labor. So that's a sort of a false narrative that I think it's very important to address. Even without the current labor laws, any dispute between a worker and an employer can be handled perfectly fine within the scope of our criminal laws and our civil laws. For example, like, if I hire you to do a job and I don't pay you, that's fraud, cheating, or that's a violation of a contract, and you can take me to court. So now that doesn't change if I am a big factory and you're a worker. So if the laws exist, those even workers can avail those laws. So I think we don't need a very burdensome different framework to address labor disputes. And right now, Indian companies are harassed by the labor department. So it is nearly impossible to run without, some issue or the other happening every day. You cannot hire people that you want. You cannot fire people that you want. Like, once you're at a certain size, even if you want to fire a few people, you have to take the permission of the government, and that's like a proper license Raj era, and the government will never give you permission. So this is the sort of burdensome regulations that have prevented companies from coming to India. And so I think it's a very good step. We need to totally deregulate. Reform and deregulation are the same thing. If you want to reform, don't change the clauses in the laws, get rid of them. And if you really see any concerns that you think that people are going to be exploited in the proper sense of exploitation, you lock somebody up in a house and make them work like bonded labor, that's equal to abducting somebody or using violence. So you can address that within the criminal laws. I don't see the necessity for these many laws. All it has done is kept the businesses and industries from developing, and we've remained backward. So
Okay. So basically, what Ajay is saying is that in a country where all the political parties have a lot of interference in the relationship between industrialists and laborer. So any change would be called a radical change. Any small change would be called radical issue. And coming to UP, almost 35, I think, acts have been done away with. But Rajesh, I would ask you that uh, Ajay is saying that it has not done enough yet. And so, do you think that it will actually attract companies from other countries to come to India? Or do you think there has to be some changes in the reform, in the labor laws, instead of just doing away with them?
I think first of all, that's a very huge, big question which can encompass. Can you guys hear me clearly? I hope you guys can hear me.
yeah.
So I think this is a very huge question and very large question, among which there are a lot of sub questions. First of all, we have to make a distinction between what is reform and what is regulation. For which, to explain that concept, I would give one linear scale example. Let's say on a scale of rigidity or strictness, we can also call it regulation. Let's say we are on 100, and deregulation would then means zero, right? So on that scale, reform, deregulation is zero, regulation is 100. The reform means incremental step towards zero. Reform does not mean suddenly changing from 100 to zero. So we, in a society that has a psyche already of being regulated at 100 points, is going toward 80, then 70, then 60, you can't suddenly say that we need to deregulate the law, because the culture, the society, the government, nobody is in that psyche, in that frame of mind to go suddenly from 70 to 0. So we have to take incremental steps, and those incremental steps is exactly what is called a reform. It's a progress, it's a direction toward the deregulation, which means that we have to bring efficiency into it. We may have to scrap some laws which are unnecessary, some statutes which are unnecessary, and may have to also tighten the screws on as far as the efficiency goes in the rest of the remaining statutes we keep. Now, as Ajay said, and I agree, there are about 100 central government statutes and there are about 40 state government statutes. Now, UP, first of all, center has not done any kind of reforms, and it will be very wrong to call these things as reforms, because reforms are permanent. This is not a reform, this is only a temporary measure that they have taken for 3 years. So it is not a reform and it is not a deregulation either. It's neither actually. It's only a temporary measure to boost up the economy for 3 years. That's it. Now, your question was whether it will bring investment or not. Now, understand this. Uh, for any new investment, and I'm not talking about existing establishments, existing setup. We are talking about any new money, new businesses coming, and new infrastructure getting created for that particular business, new labor being hired for that kind of business. Labor see, for any new business to come in, there are about 10, 15, 20 things that a business has to do, from creating the buildings, getting all the kind of approvals, the environmental approvals, there is setting up a business, there is availability of labor, then there have to be a availability of logistics and transporting the produce and everything. So labor is only one component of that thing that business has to do before getting the production out. So just saying that labor norms is going to bring investment in is very wrong to think to say, because there are other 14 things which the government has not done for easing up the business. That's one. Number two, and now imagine a new investor for a new, for example, if I'm an investor, I come to India, whether I come to India or whether I come from different state to invest in a business, all approvals and everything will take me about 14 to 18 months to get everything done, right? Before first production out of first production gets out of the factory. Labor is the last component because it is required only when you start the production. So 12 months are spent only on the rest of the things, building the infrastructure and everything. Right? Now all those things have
Mm-hmm.
not been eased up, so which means that it's still going to take me about 12 to 14 months. And you have eased the labor thing, fine, but you are easing these laws only for 3 years. So why in my sane mind would I come to invest when I know it will take me about 18 months to start a business and then 12 months to go back to the old labor laws? So I have only 12 months to recover all my money or what? No, so it doesn't make any sense. So it is completely bullshit that they say it is going to bring in new investment. What it is going to do, although, is it is good for, it can only be good for businesses which have already established. So you don't have to go through that approval process or building the infrastructure for 12 months, so you save those 12 months. So it can only be good for those which have the which have the establishment, which have all the approvals, and they have under the company that act and everything. They have the capacity, but they want to expand it. I mean, they have the expanded machinery capacity also, but what they don't have is the labor or the capital to do it. Those are the only two things missing for them. Now they have the labor because the migrant labor has come back to UP, so they have the labor also now at cheaper cost probably available. What they did not have was the capital to expand or to have new order and new business. That is where they come in. So, for example, and this is only going to help the business already there in Agra and Kanpur, and especially labor-intensive businesses like that. Exactly why some companies from German companies have moved their business from China to India, which they are going, which these UP government is going gaga over, is only because those that shoe companies have shifted their business from China. Well, these are sweatshops. These are not some great big investment companies, or companies that require great investment, or an industry on their own. We do know, I know, everybody knows how these shoe manufacturing companies are run in Agra and Kanpur. So that is one thing. Now, the other thing, other difference we need to understand is what UP has done and what MP has done. What UP has done is deregulation, as we just spoke about, because it has abolished certain laws, and out of 40, kept only 3 or 4 of them and abolished the rest of them. Completely removed. They have not changed them to have greater efficiency or something, but they have completely removed. But while what MP has done is they have removed the government interference in all the laws. They have reformed the laws wherever government interference was required. They have removed all of, and but all the minimum wages, maternity, the safety thing, hazardous laws that protect the safety of the employees, they have kept all those, which is required. It is not, nobody in their reasonable mind can argue that we should remove the safety and hazardous statutes which are to protect the laborers.
Okay.
Also, we have to, yeah, sorry, go ahead, because yeah, that's what I have to
Okay.
say about this.
Okay. You can finish it. Are you finished?
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay. So basically, to conclude, what Rajesh is saying is that it cannot be called a reform per se. It is just a temporary change that the government has done, and it might come back at any moment if the government or the political party changes in power. And secondly, it is only these changes changes in the labor laws will not guarantee investment from the multinational companies. There are a lot of components to that, right? So coming back to Ajay, I'm audible to you, Ajay, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right. So the question is that uh, speaking from a libertarian perspective, when we see that the industrialists and employers will find it easier to hire and fire at will. They will have the freedom to do whatever they want as they like. So do you think that the freedom of the employees is going to be curtailed, speaking from a libertarian perspective? Do you think that?
So I think it depends on how you define freedom as. Like, do I have a freedom to work at a company forever without any regard to economic climate, whether the company is in profits, losses, or even my own level of productivity? Let us say you hire me to do a job, and I'm not doing a good job, or you're not really in a good financial position to afford me. Is there some God-given right for me to come to you and say, I don't care what happens to you, keep paying me? I mean, do we really want private jobs to be like government jobs where nobody gets fired or removed? Labor flexibility is very important for business. The ability to hire and fire people is it really helps companies to be more efficient and more productive. I mean, let's talk about how ridiculous the labor laws in India are. So this is like a very famous case that probably started off in 1983, where this company called Bharat Forge found an employee who was repeatedly sleeping on the job, and so after several warnings, after 5 months or something, they just fired him. So this guy goes to court, and it went on, like, through the courts, and finally the court decided that the company has to hire him back and pay him 50% of back wages. Now understand, this is a guy who was sleeping on the job. So then the company went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court finally said, okay, company, you were right in firing that guy, he was not working properly. But you know how long this process took? 22 years. So, for example, if a company
20.
has to run 22 years. So this started in 1983 and it went on till 2005. So you expect, like, this is the sort of situation that we have in the country. I mean, if a company has to spend 22 years running behind courts, how is it actually going to get the job done? So our courts are obviously inefficient, and we don't really want to burden them with every single decision where a judge sits and says, okay, you fired this guy, okay, you have valid justification. Like, you shouldn't have to justify. Like, I mean, there are things that we have to look at, such as contract. For example, if I hire you for a 1 year contract and I have laid the parameters of your job performance, then obviously I cannot just remove you randomly, right? I will be held to upholding my end of the contract. But other than that, I don't think that demonizing hire and fire is a good thing. It's a great thing. And in fact, the IT industry, which has actually thrived in India, is a sector which has escaped all these union laws and hiring, firing restrictions and all. So when Infosys removes a guy, they don't have to go to the government and get an approval or get a union approval. They hire and the fire. And our Indian IT sector, I mean, no matter what you say, is one of the biggest industries, and we've done a phenomenally good job. And this the other thing that people don't understand: the job of a company is not to fire people. Like, a company doesn't exist just to fire people; they hire people to get work done. So, and you randomly just you don't fire people all the time and hire them the next day, because it takes a lot of time for new labor to understand your processes, and there's a training cost involved. So there's a company called Zappos. Okay, so there they have this offer where every new hire to the company, in the first 3 months, they have an offer saying, we'll give you 1 month of free salary if you quit. And now that seems counterintuitive. Why is a company paying people to just quit the job? So their logic is, if somebody quits for that little amount of money, I mean, which is 1 month salary, which is not a trivial sum, it's that they probably are the people who will quit anyway for some small thing or for an additional hike in another company. So there is so much cost of training new employees, and it's better that those people leave immediately right away, so that the long term people who are invested into the whole thing stay. So this sort of lifetime employment, and
Right.
all these schemes have to die. And this is what China did after Deng Xiaoping, the premier, came into power. He got rid of this lifetime employment, government mandated control over the management staff and all. It was a good reform, and China obviously did well due to some of those specific reforms. So I think hire and fire might sound look like a nasty thing, but it's normal. It's the from a libertarian perspective, it's absolutely fine for two voluntary individuals or two parties to make contracts and you know on the basis of those terms. So,
Okay, so basically, when we look at it from both the sides, so it is not just some one-sided draconian measure by the employers. So, and when if someone is sleeping on the job, and when someone has a guarantee of being paid for a lifetime, so he might not be very productive. Okay, so what Ajay is saying is that hire and fire might sound nasty and draconian, but that is how a healthy business operates. So, what do you think, Rajesh? That this sort of thing does it somehow curtail the freedom and liberty of the employee, or do you think he should be able to take the employer to the court or something like that? What are your views?
Okay, first of all, I think hire and fire every both should be equally free, employer and employee both. If employee is free to leave a company and join another company at any time, of course by giving the notice, the company should also be free to hire or to fire any employee by giving a new notice, notice period or something like that. Having said that, the problem in the contracts is that most of the people, and especially the skilled labor, and I'm not going above the middle class IT sector or whatever. I'm talking about industries where we require lot of labor, lot of which are labor intensified industries, and where a lot of labor is required, and a lot of labor is also unskilled. For example, textile industry, shoe industry. As far as this hire and fire policy goes, uh, I think it is an equal contract between should be an equal contract between the employee and the employer. If employer is free to, you know, if employee is free to leave the company and join another company at any moment by giving notice, the employer should also be free to do the same and fire the employee by giving him the notice. Other thing is, I feel that this whole headline that is coming to the news, the companies now can hire and fire at will, is a clickbait thing. That is not actually true. Earlier, what used to happen, so there are three stakeholders involved here as of current. you know One is the labor, the worker, then the company. Sorry, the four stakeholders: labor, the company, the trade union, and the government, as of now. So hire and fire, right now, what it meant was, as Ajay had already explained, that it would require a lot of government intervention. If you need to fire somebody, you need government permission for that. That was the basic problem that UP government saw, or MP government also saw, is a problem for
Hmm.
employers. They feel scared of firing anybody, because then trade unions come back at you, and then you can't fight it in the government also, in the court also, because as per laws you are stipulated to inform the government and take government permission or whatever thing like that. So what government has only done is it has removed itself out as the stakeholder and let the other three parties remain there. So it is between the trade union, the government, the trade union, the employer, and the government has nothing to do with it. The employer doesn't have to inform the government that they are going to fire this employee or hire this employee. They don't have to maintain the register or file labor returns that they have to. So those are the kind of things government has removed, and which is a good thing. So, there's one funny thing. A lot of left liberals in India say that, you know, we India should have a Scandinavian kind of a model, capitalist welfare model, like Scandinavian countries. You know what is common in Scandinavian countries? They have no minimum wages. Finland, Ireland, Norway, Sweden, none of them have minimum wages statute. Only in India we have it. And that is exactly the problem I had with the UP government, what UP government has recently done. what they have done is they have removed the safety laws rather than removing the minimum wage law. They have kept the minimum wage same. So even if now migrant labor coming back to UP and the companies looking for expansion now hire them, they will still have to hire by the same minimum wage and not going by the market rates, which will obviously otherwise lower the wages, because now there's a surplus of labor there. So it's not going to lower the wage. It's going to still have to hire at the minimum wage. So what benefit do they get? They should have removed the minimum wage. That is the most important thing that has to be removed. It's same like, like farm, in a farm, in farming, the minimum support value, price support that government gives is more of a hindrance for farmers to sell at more than the price that government stipulates. So even in this case, the same thing happens, that the, the employees, the laborers who can demand more price are also not given more price, because there are who are being given more price when being unskilled rather. So there is a complete inequality among the laborers, how how people can get same amount of money whether they are skilled or unskilled, and that's what causes the real problems. And government has removed itself out of that, which is a good thing.
Okay. Okay. So what you're saying is that it is basically a good thing, and the hire and fire works both the ways. If an employee
Yeah.
can switch jobs, the employer has the right to fire and hire at will without involving the government. Now let's come back to Ajay. Uh, the thing that is bothering people is more than the changes in the laws. It is the timing that is bothering them. For one, the economy is reeling under the lockdown. There is a pandemic going on, and the laborers are migrating from South India to Bihar and from Maharashtra to UP, and they are on foot. So there is a lot of problem going on already in the life of the poor migrant laborers who are walking home. So the thing is that at such a time, the narrative is being spun that this emergency is being used to push this anti-poor legislation. And when these people are already out of work, this sort of legislation will crush them further. So that sort of thing is being used. So do you think that timing is very interesting, or is there any truth to that industrialists are being favored in some way or the other? What do you think about?
Okay, the couple of issues here. Let's talk about the reverse migration. I mean, everybody is going from the southern states back to UP, Bihar. Um, First of all, this is absolutely the government's fault. They just randomly announced a lockdown and then abandoned those people to the wolves. Like there was not enough government support, and it was all these non-profits and private individuals supporting them. So these people were really afraid. The employers were shut down, they weren't getting money, and then they all wanted to go back to their homes and their families, which I think is a normal state of mind when you are sort of put in such a situation. So all these people wanted to get home. The government hasn't done anything about it. And see, all the migrant labor suddenly rushing back to their home states is not something which is unprecedented. Like during every year, like depending on which state, I think during Chat Puja and these sort of things, a lot of people go back to their home state. This happens all the time. It's just that the government announced a lockdown, like other states. I think even Bangladesh and all these countries have given ample amount of time, saying like we will have a lockdown. It will be done in 10 days, 15 days. Notice so these people can leave. So that didn't happen. So these people obviously panicked, and a lot of things that the government has done has, I would say, anti-poor. Okay, because uh, you have to, I mean, you can't abandon them. So that out of the way, let's talk about this specific legislations that the government has done. And it's not the government of India again, it's just individual states that have been doing this. A proper reform from the central government hasn't still come or hasn't been proposed. uh, um, this is not an anti-poor legislation. That's number one. So when people talk about all these migrant labors, do you think all these people are actually protected by labor laws? No. the informal sector, or even this all this construction, they constitute majority of the workers. 90% of India's employees were never under coverage of this act. For example, 90% of Maharashtra is in the informal sector. 97% of Gujarat is in the informal sector. So there's overall in India, there's maybe 10% of people who were covered by all these labor law protections and all. So it protects a minority of people. So unionized labor, people who are working in factories with all these protections, uh, they're a very fringe minority. To say that this legislation is anti-poor is wrong. This labor laws have done a lot of damage, and I think the only people that this is protecting is the unionized labor and a small number of people in the formal sector, the government officers, politicians, labor inspectors who get bribes and can play around with favorites and getting jobs and all that. So this is not anti-poor. It benefits the majority of the people because see, 90% of the people were not under these protections, so their life is not going to change. What's going to happen now is it's going to make hiring more competitive, because workers don't just companies don't just compete for workers also compete between themselves. And as Rajesh pointed out earlier, a good law to scrap would have been the Minimum Wages Act, which has not been scrapped as far as I know. And the central government is planning on instituting a nationwide minimum wage, which is another bad thing because it sort of prevents competition between states. So there was a study done maybe 10-15 years ago by a couple of guys at London School of Economics, by Timothy Besley and Robin Burgess. So they did a study of all the states in India right from independence to about 2000, and they what the results show is that they split states into two types, like pro worker and pro employer. So on one edge you had something like West Bengal, which is like totally under union control and you can't do anything, and which is why West Bengal has remained backward. And on the other side they took an example of Andhra Pradesh, which was according to their classification considered pro employer. And they showed that, for example, in 1990 West Bengal would have had 10% less poverty had it regulated in a pro employer or made it more free to do business. So by actually having all these laws, we are hurting the poor because our country is remaining poor. There's not enough progress, not enough jobs, and that is very obvious. Like everybody knows about the case of West Bengal, right? So when you have laws like that, states are going to be poor. So the evidence is very clear that if you have very strong laws like what West Bengal and all these people have, and rigid, I won't even say strong, rigid, inflexible, useless laws, people are going to be poor, and that's entirely the fault of that. And let's take the case of the textile industry. So in India, while from in the last 10 years, our textile industry exports have sort of been dropping. I think the rate of growth has dropped, while Bangladesh and Vietnam have totally exploded. Like they're gaining dominance. And there was a study that was done on the number of people who work in textile mills, and they found that India has, on an average, 240 people working in textile mills, while Bangladesh has 800 people per textile mill, and that is an indicator of productivity. As you scale, the larger firms have better productivity, and the productivity in India has always been low, and labor laws are one of the major contributors to that. So we have had like close to 600 textile mills shut down, and most of the issues they had were, other than slowing economy, demonetization, GST, all that set apart, were issues with unions. They're very inflexible. You can't even have them change the sort of job. Like if you're having one guy working in a certain assembly line, you can't shift him to another one without the union permission. So all this makes it very difficult. So if we get rid of those laws, it is definitely pro-poor. The poor are going to be the ones who are going to benefit the most by deregulating. The empirical evidence is very clear on that. Like this is not an issue on which there's any second guessing. The evidence is absolutely outlined. So is this anti-poor? Definitely not. Is the government doing this within COVID emergency? Yes, but they should have done it in 2014 when they won with a landmark mandate, or at least in 2019 when they won with even bigger mandate. They have not done it. The government's very weak, and it's very unfortunate that the people are suffering because of that.
Okay, so I think Ajay brings up two very important points. That first of all, the migrant laborers walking home, most of them are not covered anyway by these labor laws. So I think that is a very important point to bring up. And secondly, he gives an example of West Bengal, how rigid laws keep the state poor, and so basically the draconian laws can be called anti-poor and not this abolishment of these laws that is anti-poor. So I think that is distinction is very important, and the distinction that the how government abandoned the migrants to walk home, that step was basically anti-poor. Now taking it to Rajesh, that since we see that the timing is very interesting, and we discussed that it should have happened before, like Ajay said. So, do you think in order to understand the timing of these changes, so you said that only these changes in the labor laws will not attract investment from China or from other MNCs? So, do you think that these laws will help generate employment for those migrants coming home in the industries that are already established? Or what else do you think is the rationale of doing it at this moment?
Yes, it will definitely help. It will not help bring in the investment or new investment, but as I said earlier, it will definitely help the already established industries looking for expansion, which have the machinery but did not have the labor or the capital. It will help those industries, and especially the sweatshops in Agra and Kanpur, especially the shoemaking industry. It will help that industry because see, we have to understand this, and as Ajay also pointed out, we have to understand who are these people, who are these migrant laborers. First of all, it is wrong to assume that they are poor. They are not poor. They were going back because of the lack of transport. They could have been poor, they could have been rich. It does not make a difference. If a rich wanted to go to from Delhi wanted to go to Bihar, he would have also had to walk. He couldn't get any transport, right? So there's no difference. They are not poor. They are basically, as he pointed out, pointed out rightly, that they are not the people. They are the people who do not belong to the unionized labor. They are the people who are not unionized. They are the labor that who are not unionized, and that's perfect. That's exactly what it is. It does not necessarily. So you know what? When we assume, when we imagine non, you know, non-unionized labor, we imagine only the construction workers in our head, and that's the problem mainly, and that's how we equate them to the poor. Whereas, imagine the Uber drivers, imagine the auto rickshaw drivers, imagine all the Swiggy drivers. They are also the same category. All they are unskilled labor. Their only skill is knowing how to drive. They can't work in the factories, and they work day to day. They are like contractual labor who work on daily wages. Uber, Swiggy, all these people are not on salaries. So it's not about poor. A migrant labor could be a person working in a factory for last 4 years. These guys can be the contractual labor, the construction workers as well. But these guys can also be the other contractual labor, which is not construction workers, which are earning quite well, which have been living here. But for them, it is not. It was not about money. It was about just going back their home. For them, it was better to die at home than to die here because of coronavirus. So for them, it did not matter what Modi said, whether stay in the lockdown. Yes, everybody has some money for some few days, so they probably also had some money for to survive for a few days. And because they are the kind of people who earn every day, auto rickshaw drivers, bus drivers, uh, Uber drivers, Swiggy drivers, all these people also, when there is no business, what will they do here? It's better to go back home. So there are those people also. Now, that is one distinction that I want to make, that all migrants are not poor necessarily. They are going there because they have a will to go, they want to go. There is nothing else. The other thing is about saying that government has abandoned them. I think government was quite clear when it announced the lockdown. It asked everybody to stay where they are. It was very clear. Now there are people who did not stay where they are. As it included people who were, attending marriages, the people who were in Tablighi Jamaat, people who were attending the temples also. Likewise, there are other migrant laborers also who just want to go back home or just don't want to follow the lockdown procedures. There is no government who can control that, or who can announce things based on those kind of things. You can't expect that, oh, migrant labor will walk down, what have we done for them? That's not a libertarian thinking, that's a socialist thinking, I would rather say. Let them be on their own is a libertarian thinking. Each on their own is a libertarian thinking. So that is another conflict that I see here. So these kind of labors which are not necessarily poor. These are poor plus non-poor, but they are migrants. Agreed. Now they come back to UP and Madhya Pradesh and states like that, and yes, there is an abundance of labor now. So who will this help? It will, and we have already discussed. It is not going to bring in the new investment which wants to start now. It is only going to help the established businesses there who want to expand, but they have not imagine, but they have not removed the minimum wage law. So even if this labor is there, it has to be hired at above minimum wage levels. So the abundance of labor is not bringing the wages down at all. What it is doing is it is removing the safety laws and everything, which is making cheaper for the businesses to expand by cutting other costs rather than cutting on the labor cost, actual labor cost. So yes, it will help some businesses, but only the businesses which are local and who run as sweatshops. Those are the kind of businesses that it will help. Yes.
Okay, so I think Rajesh also made a very good distinction that migrants who are walking home, some of them are poor, yes. Of course, some of them are really poor who do not have adequate even food, and some might not be that poor as well. They just want to go home by their own will. So there has to be some sort of assistance also, whatever way possible. Now, so I think we have discussed the labor laws, how it has changed things, how it should have happened before, or is it later. So I think we have covered those points, and I would once again thank Ajay for joining us today in this discussion, and for bringing out this libertarian perspective and looking at this situation from multiple perspectives actually. So I hope it has been a good discussion for you as well.
Yep. It was good talking to you guys. I just want to add one small thing about what Rajesh said. When we spoke about abandoning the poor and the migrant labor, and yes, it is possible that there are Swiggy and Ola and Uber drivers. A lot of construction workers. I mean, the seasonal migrant labor is not usually your Swiggy workers. So when Kerala or all these states have lakhs of people going, they're mostly agriculture, farm labor, or construction labor. And sure, they might have, and these people are not, I wouldn't say rich. Well, they may have a marginal amount of saving that gets depleted really fast in the lockdown. And it's not that if these people had an option to stay somewhere with food, they would still risk that and go. And we have seen how the government aid has been very little. And it's not a question of being a socialist here when we are talking about what the government has not done, because the government, from the libertarian perspective, the government even shouldn't stop them from going back to their houses, and moving back. So the government, when you break somebody's legs, giving them a crutch is not socialism. When the government has actually done something like that, it could have done it with a little bit more forethought, and considering that this
Yeah,
is India, you have to take
sometimes
those
I
things
think
into account.
right. So I think when the lockdown was announced in March end, so I think if those laborers were provided with some trains or something at that moment, so
And
this thing would not have turned.
you don't even have to provide them trains. I mean, these people go all the time. They get on buses, trains, and go. What happened was, every all the businesses were shut down forcibly, so the employers couldn't pay the salaries. These people didn't have food to eat, and then when they were walking, they were beaten on the roads. So it's not that simple to just say that these people still want to go home for no matter what. Few of them maybe, but if they feel secure in a place, they would not abandon it to walk 800 kilometers just for the sake of it, get beaten by cops, risk death. I mean, I don't think that's a very
Okay.
Okay,
I have to
okay.
add. I have to say a point here. Uh, we have to make this distinction that, and Ajay and both agreed that these people who are walking back, migrant laborers as we call them now, These are not the salaried labor. These are the contractual labor, and we agree on that. Now, this contractual labor could be the working in the construction sector or the farm sector or Swiggy, Uber, etc., etc. But this is all contractual labor, and this is going back to their homes. That we agree. The funny part here is Modi said that no employer should stop the salaries of anybody, and they should give their employees salary for the next 3 months. But then the problem is these are the contractual labor; these are not the salaried labor, and that's exactly why they lost their jobs. Now, the funny part, the irony here is the argument goes in the favor of the trade unions. That everybody should be salaried so that they don't lose the jobs in such pandemics. So it's a double whammy kind of a thing, and I would rather say yes, they lost. They went back only because they did not have money, and they did not have money only because they lost their jobs, and they lost their jobs only because they were the contractual laborers. If they were salaried labor, they wouldn't have lost their jobs.
I don't really
It's
think
as
that's how,
simple as
because
that.
if these people are working in a farms, you can't, the government can't order the farmer to pay these guys salaries.
No,
I
I
mean,
agree. I agree about
the
that.
government can
I agree
hypothetically
about that.
order, but even companies which are in the formal sector have not been able to give their wages because of cash flow issues. So the government can hypothetically tell everybody, like, pay your maid in the house 20,000 rupees a month, but that won't happen, right? We have to look at it from a realistic perspective. And if you're working in a construction site, if you're constructing a building and hire migrant labor, it is going to be a contract job because your construction is going to take 6 months, and after that the job is done. You're not going to keep paying them for the rest of their life. So I don't think that's the argument that we should be. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't see that as an argument.
I think I would say that it is more of a management issue. I think more of a management issue that these people should have been given that sort of assistance. So I think it would not have rolled out like this. But yes, I think the salaried
No,
people
no.
will not get. I
My
think
point is this: we've let the migrant labor go back to their towns and villages now, and that's happening through all these trains and all. Instead of all this panic now, the government could have given like a 15-day time frame and told people, see, after this, there's going to be an absolute lockdown. There's going to be no work. So make sure that you're well provided for. Go wherever you feel secure, and maybe this could have been avoided. What's happened now? The number of coronavirus cases today are not lesser than what we had back then. So. What have we really accomplished?
right.
Okay, I have to add another point here is
Okay, so
related to the same thing. Sorry, Omar, to stop you. Uh, this we don't have to focus on the migrant labor. I don't know why we are focusing on the migrant labor. It is the contractual labor which is facing the problem, whether they have gone back or whether they have not gone back. They are the people who have lost their jobs. It's as clear as anything to me. It doesn't matter whether they have gone back or not gone back. It is only the contractual labor that has lost their jobs. Yes, they will find jobs back their home also, as many uh, attempts are done by UP government, by MP government. Even banks are doing, because they are asking if anybody has a money, they can become an entrepreneur while they go back to their hometowns, or sorry, villages, and they can open bank kiosks in their own villages, because right now social distancing is the norm and people are not encouraged to travel that far to go to the banks, etc. So banks are coming to the villages and the panchayats and the tehsils. So people who are going back are being encouraged to open bank kiosks there. So those kind of things should be done, and we have to find the solution to a panacea called contract labor. That is the real problem. And my argument is not that they should move to the salary. Yes, everybody should move to the salary, not the contract labor, because contract labor is the result of bad labor laws. Even now, even before this UP had removed these laws, even before that, why did a factory had to move to a contractual labor? There are only two reasons. One, because their requirement was not 8 hours. The work was not 8 hours per day for a month. It was more sporadic, more spread out, and that's why you need contractual labor. The other reason is because of the labor laws, which do not allow you to expand beyond certain number of labor that you can have in your company, and the kind of systems that you require for the labor register, to file the labor returns with the government, and all those government permissions that you need to take to expand. So that's why factories used to outsource their labor to some other person who will send the labor in the factory, but on the contractual rate. They will not be on the factory roles, and that is the only reason for the contractual labor. If we remove these draconian laws, those same contractual labor can come back on the salaried labor, And for this, and that is why I gave this Scandinavian example earlier, you remove the minimum wages, you remove the government intervention, but you also need to make the trade unions stronger rather, not weaker. Because India is not a literate country. Yes, it is a social contract between the employee and the employer, fine. But the employee is not literate. He can't even read a social contract. You need somebody who can understand those contracts. So for that's where trade unions come in, and they need to work as a strengthening mechanism for both government and the employers and the employees and all, all the other parties. They don't have to act as a restricting mechanism for everybody. They have to act as a strengthening mechanism for everybody. All the Scandinavian countries have very rigorous trade unions, despite not even having minimum wage policy.
I think there's a
Okay,
small
so I
difference
think
here. Like, I mean, sorry. Yeah, so what I would like to say is, like, instead of saying that everybody should move to salaried labor, I, or the other side, would like to think that a salaried employee is basically it's a contract between an employee and an employer, but that one that is subject to certain government norms and regulations. I think the way forward is to look at all these transactions at the very on a contractual basis, and we have contract labor everywhere across the world, even in US, even in countries with relatively relaxed labor laws, because sometimes you just need people to work for a month or two, or sometimes you need a specialized skill force for a few period, and contract labor makes sense. But I think the libertarian way is to look at things, relations from a very contractual basis. And Rajesh does have a point, saying that we have a lot of illiterate population who don't understand, and he says that's where unions should step in. I am in support of collective bargaining, so because I believe that it's a right of individuals to form groups and represent their interests. I only think that the government should not mandate that by force, because what happens now is even 7 people in a company of 150 or 200 employees can create a union, right? Random 7 people, and then they can start dictating terms, and the government will step in. It makes things very difficult. Now, the libertarian position would be that yes, they can collectively bargain. If all the employees group up together and say, unless you hike our salaries, we'll not work, agree to this contract, that's absolutely fine. But the company also has the right saying, you know what, let me get some additional labor from Bihar or West Bengal, wherever. Those guys are going to work without all these terms. And see, and when those people come and work, the union shouldn't stop them. And if you look at it, those people who are going to benefit if company does this might be people who are more desperate for money. So in a way, that even that becomes a very pro-poor thing. So that's all I wanted to add.
Agreed. Agreed. Everything agreed.
okay. So I think this has been a wonderful discussion, and I thank Ajay for joining us and bringing out the libertarian perspective, and Rajesh also for agreeing and disagreeing, and having this discussion from multiple point of views. And I request all the viewers also to participate in the comments and give their views, because this is a broad topic that cannot be summed up in 30 minutes. So I hope we will have some good interaction, and hopefully see you next week with a new episode. So thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, Rajesh
Yeah.
and Omer.
Thank you.
It was a good discussion. Thanks for having me on the show. So, cheers.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you, Omar. And thank you very much, Ajay, for having a very enlightening discussion and being a sport, for tolerating me and being with me. Uh, I'm glad that we sorted out everything and we are on the
Great.
same page, as long as everything is fine. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, viewers, for watching Choosing the Red Pill, episode 4, and we'll again see you next week with some other thing, some other guest, some other topic with Rajesh and Omer. Thank you so much.